On June 26, 2020, at 6:38 in the morning, in one of the most exclusive areas of Mexico City, an official convoy was attacked with .50 caliber Barrett rifles, fragmentation grenades, and nearly 30 trained hitmen. The objective was clear and without ambiguity: to assassinate the head of the capital's police in broad daylight. The man who survived that massacre is named Omar Garcia Harfuch, and almost 6 years later, that same man, now serving as Secretary of Security and Citizen Protection of the federal government, led the operation that ended the life of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, alias El Mencho, the most wanted drug lord in Mexico, founder and leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the same organization that morning sent its gunmen to execute him. This is not a story of coincidences or narratives built after the fact. Yet this is a story about the power of organized crime at its maximum expression, about the real vulnerabilities of the Mexican state, about the ability of a man to remain standing after being left for dead, and about the moment when the Mexican government decided that enough was enough. To understand it fully, we have to start from the beginning. To understand why the CJNG wanted Omar Garcia Harfuch dead in the summer of 2020, we must understand who that man was, where he came from, and what he represented within the Mexican security apparatus at that particular historical moment. Garcia Harfuch is not a desk politician. He is not an official who arrived at his position through party connections. He is a career police officer trained within the criminal intelligence structure of the Mexican state. Why, he spent years inside the Criminal Investigation Agency, the country's most specialized unit in intelligence, tracking criminal networks, and combating high-impact organized crime. He knew the methods, he knew the structures, he knew the people, and that made him different. When Claudia Sheinbaum, then head of government of Mexico City, appointed him Secretary of Citizen Security of the capital in 2019, Garcia Harfuch took office with a clear agenda: professionalize the capital's police force, implement intelligence-based methodologies in crime fighting, and above all, go after the organized crime cells operating in Mexico City with an impunity that had lasted far too long. During his first year at the head of the Secretariat of Citizen Security, Garcia Harfuch pushed for the capture of several CJNG operators with active presence in the capital. These were not minor arrests. They were targeted strikes based on intelligence that directly affected the cartel's operations in the city. That made him a priority target for the organization. By that time, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel was already the most aggressive criminal organization with the greatest firepower in all of Mexico. Unlike other cartels that sought to negotiate spaces of power with the state or maintain a relatively discreet profile, the CJNG had built its identity on direct confrontation. Ambushes against military forces, attacks on government facilities, selective assassinations of public officials. Everything was part of its strategy. And the message they wanted to send with Garcia Harfuch was the most important they had attempted up to that point. No one who pursues us is safe, not even in the political and financial heart of the country. For decades, Mexico City had functioned as a kind of détente territory, a space where major cartels operated discreetly without escalating violence in a visible way. Major attacks, open massacres, confrontations with the army, those happened in Jalisco, in Michoacán, in Tamaulipas, in Guanajuato, not on Paseo de la Reforma. What happened on June 26, 2020, destroyed that illusion definitively and changed the perception of public security in Mexico in a way that still resonates today. The morning of June 26, 2020 began like any other workday for Garcia Harfuch's team. It was Thursday, while the secretary was traveling in his official convoy along Paseo de la Reforma, one of the most monitored and patrolled corridors in the entire capital, heading toward Lomas de Chapultepec. It was early. Traffic was still light. The city was just beginning to wake up. At 6:38 a.m., when the armored vehicle carrying the secretary reached the intersection of Paseo de la Reforma and Monte Blanco Street, in the heart of Lomas de Chapultepec, the criminal operation that had been planned for weeks was activated simultaneously and in a coordinated manner. At least 2 trucks deliberately blocked the convoy's path. One of them bore the logos of a private courier company, a facade specifically designed to blend into normal commercial traffic and avoid raising suspicion in the minutes before the attack. Within seconds, between 25 and 28 gunmen descended from the vehicles carrying weapons no one expected to see on the streets of a capital city. 50 caliber Barrett rifles, weapons originally designed for military use in conventional warfare, capable of penetrating vehicle armor, shooting down low-altitude aircraft, and piercing concrete structures. They also carried high-caliber long guns and fragmentation grenades. The attackers opened fire simultaneously from multiple angles, covering the convoy's escape routes. The shootout did not last seconds. It lasted more than 20 minutes. 20 minutes of sustained, uninterrupted gunfire on one of the most transited and surveilled avenues in Mexico, in broad morning daylight, with civilians just beginning their daily routines. Like the armored vehicle carrying Garcia Harfuch received multiple direct impacts from Barrett rifles. The armor withstood most of the fire, but not all of it. 3 shots partially penetrated the vehicle's protection, striking the secretary in the shoulder, the arm, and one leg. Garcia Harfuch was wounded but conscious. He was rushed to a private hospital in the city where he underwent surgery. The human toll was 3 people dead, 2 of the secretary's bodyguards who were killed on the spot during the exchange of fire, and a civilian woman who was passing through the area in her private vehicle at that moment. She had no connection to Garcia Harfuch, to the convoy, or to any security force. She died because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her name was mentioned only briefly in some media outlets, overshadowed by the political impact of the attack. That omission says a great deal about how Mexico processes its tragedies. Hours after the attack, Garcia Harfuch released a message from the hospital that would become one of the most remembered in recent Mexican public security history. With open wounds after surgery, he wrote that he directly blamed the Jalisco New Generation cartel for the attack, that the CJNG had committed this cowardly assault, and that he would continue his work regardless of the consequences. In a country where threatened officials frequently retreat or remain silent, those words carried enormous weight. The C5 surveillance system of Mexico City captured virtually the entire attack from multiple angles. The images clearly showed the tactical coordination of the criminal operation, vehicles positioning themselves to block the road, gunmen deploying in formation from both sides of the avenue, the magnitude of the sustained crossfire, and the speed with which the attackers attempted to breach the armored vehicle. Those images were decisive both for the criminal investigation and for the public narrative of the case. The crime scene revealed abundant ballistic evidence, dozens of shell casings of different calibers scattered across several meters of pavement, grenade fragments, impact marks on nearby walls and properties, and the secretary's armored vehicle with multiple visible perforations documenting the intensity of the fire it received. Forensic experts confirmed that the weapons used were of exclusive military use, or implying that the attackers had access to war-grade arms acquisition channels. In the hours immediately following the attack, authorities arrested 12 people allegedly involved. Days later, the number rose to 19 detainees, all transferred to different high-security federal prisons. Among those arrested, one name stood out above the rest: Jose Armando Chavez Gastelo, alias El Vaca, identified by authorities as the CJNG's plaza boss and hitman coordinator in the municipality of Tonalá, Jalisco. Investigations identified him as the alleged intellectual author of the attack, the man responsible for planning, coordinating, and executing the operation from the operational side of the criminal organization. Investigations also revealed the national and international dimension of the operation. The gunmen were recruited from different states across the country, confirming that the CJNG had the capacity to mobilize human resources at a federal level for high-impact operations. Among those arrested, at least one Colombian citizen was identified, evidencing the use of international contacts for certain types of operations. Each participant had received specific payment to join the cells sent to execute the attack. All this evidence pointed to a conclusion that security analysts had already suspected, but that the attack confirmed brutally. The CJNG was not just a trafficking organization. It was a paramilitary structure with its own intelligence, logistical capacity comparable to some irregular armies, and the political will to confront the Mexican state directly in any territory, including the capital. See, then-President Andrés Manuel López Obrador publicly and forcefully condemned the attack in his morning press conference that same day. Claudia Sheinbaum appeared before the media to reiterate that there would be no negotiation or concessions in the face of organized crime. The statements were firm. The country heard them and waited to see if they would translate into something concrete. What authorities revealed in the following days was disturbing. There had been prior intelligence alerts about a possible attack against Garcia Harfuch. The information existed within the system. However, preventive measures were not sufficient to dismantle the operation before it occurred, nor to adequately protect the secretary during his movements. That point was never publicly explained in a satisfactory manner. Yet the gap between available intelligence and operational response remained open like an unclosed wound in the case file. After the attack, security protocols for high-profile officials were significantly reviewed and reinforced. But the most lasting impact of the attack was not operational. It was political and personal. Garcia Harfuch did not request leave. He did not step down. He did not lower his profile. He remained at the head of Mexico City's Secretariat of Citizen Security until September 2023. And when Claudia Sheinbaum won the presidency on July 4, 2024, she publicly announced him as her Secretary of Security and Citizen Protection at the federal level, a position he formally assumed on October 1, 2024. On the same day, Sheinbaum took office as President of Mexico. The man the CJNG had tried to assassinate was now in charge of the security of 130 million Mexicans. And with that position came something more: institutional capacity, federal intelligence resources, and international cooperation channels necessary to go after the most elusive target in Mexican drug trafficking, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. El Mencho, Nemesio Oseguera, Cervantes was born in Tierra Caliente, Michoacán, one of the regions historically most punished by poverty. He began his criminal career as a member of Los Quines, an organization with links to drug trafficking in Jalisco, before founding the Jalisco New Generation Cartel in the early 2000s. In less than 10 years, he transformed the CJNG into the most powerful and most violent criminal organization in all of Latin America. Under his leadership, the CJNG expanded its operations to more than 28 states in Mexico and established distribution networks in more than 40 countries. It was the first Mexican cartel to use drones, loaded with homemade explosives against military and police patrols. It was responsible for collective massacres in Jalisco, Guanajuato, and Michoacán that left dozens dead and hundreds of families displaced. And it accumulated more active federal charges in the United States than any other Mexican criminal structure in recent history, including rewards of up to millions of dollars offered by the U.S. government for information leading to his capture. For years, Mencho operated in the shadows. Unlike El Chapo, who had a documented public presence, Mencho maintained an extraordinarily discreet profile. He moved constantly, changed locations frequently, and delegated daily cartel operations to a network of regional leaders capable of functioning independently. That made him nearly impossible to locate for more than a decade. February 22, 2026 was different. From the early hours of that Sunday, Special Forces units of the Mexican Army, supported by Air Force aircraft and immediate reaction Special Force units of the National Guard, carried out a high-impact operation in the municipality of Tapalpa in the southern mountains of Jalisco, a pueblo mágico that for years had been used by the CJNG as an operations and financial control zone. The operation was the result of coordinated military intelligence work between the National Intelligence Center, the Attorney General's office, and, according to federal sources confirmed by national media, information support from the United States government. The operation led to a direct confrontation. For more than 3 hours, according to residents' accounts, high-powered gunfire and military aircraft were heard over the region. At the end of the operation, 4 CJNG members had died at the scene. 3 others were seriously wounded, including the person identified as Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. Authorities attempted to transfer them by air to Mexico City for medical attention. All 3 died during the transfer, including El Mencho. The Secretariat of National Defense officially confirmed the operation, identifying the deceased as Ruben N., alias El Mencho, in accordance with Mexican legal protocol. The confirmation was definitive. The leader of the CJNG was dead. Specific details of the operation were not fully disclosed immediately, as is customary in actions of this nature. The CJNG's reaction was immediate, coordinated, and violent on multiple fronts simultaneously. In Jalisco, the cartel's home state, cells activated road blockades within hours. Vehicles were set on fire on federal highways and state roads, blocking traffic and generating logistical chaos in one of the country's most important regions. Images circulating on social media showed columns of black smoke rising over empty highways, overturned trucks blocking lanes, and communities emptied by fear. In Michoacán, Tamaulipas, Guanajuato, Colima, Nayarit, and Aguascalientes, similar actions were reported almost simultaneously, confirming the CJNG's ability to activate coordinated responses nationwide, even after losing its top leader. The governor of Jalisco, Pablo Lemus, declared a red code in the state, asked the population to remain calm, and publicly recognized the work of federal forces. Security authorities reported the arrest of 50 people in Jalisco, Guanajuato, and Baja California in the hours following confirmation of Mencho's death. Arrests directly linked to the attacks, blockades, and retaliatory actions organized by cartel cells. In Mexico City and the state of Mexico, preventive operations were deployed at strategic points, including entrances to the Valley of Mexico. In Sinaloa, after more than 4 hours of highway chaos, authorities reported the gradual clearing of blockades. The Liga MX suspended matches scheduled in Jalisco, while several concerts and public events in the state were canceled, including one by the artist Kali Uchis. The Mexican Open tennis tournament in Acapulco had to issue an official statement denying its cancellation amid a wave of misinformation circulating on social media. The entire country was paused, processing the magnitude of what had occurred. Mencho's death generated deeply divided reactions in Mexico, as usually happens with events of this nature in a country where the relationship between the state, organized crime, and citizens is complex, historical, and layered in ways that are not resolved with a single operation. For a significant part of society, especially in communities in Jalisco, Guanajuato, and other states devastated for years by direct CJNG violence, families who lost children in massacres, or merchants who paid extortion for years, farmers who saw their crops confiscated, entire communities that lived under cartel territorial control, the news was received with cautious, silent relief. It was not celebration. It was the kind of relief that comes after after too much accumulated pain. But security analysts, specialized journalists, and researchers who study drug trafficking in Mexico were more cautious. History has repeatedly shown that the fall of a cartel leader does not eliminate the organization. It may fragment it, destabilize internal power balances, generate violence over control of vacant leadership, but it rarely destroys the structure. The CJNG is a decentralized organization with strong regional leadership, trafficking routes consolidated over more than a decade, diversified funding sources, and recruitment capacity that never depended exclusively on Mencho. What did change definitively and irreversibly was the narrative of power in Mexico. Omar Garcia Harfuch, the man who took 3 bullets from CJNG gunmen that June morning in 2020, the man who wrote from his hospital bed that he would not surrender, the man who continued in his post and rose to the federal government. When Mencho's death became known, he posted a message on his social media, publicly recognizing the Mexican Army and Air Force for the operation. "Our recognition to the Mexican Army and Air Force," he wrote. No triumphalism, no personal reference to the attack he suffered 5 years earlier, just a line of institutional acknowledgement to the armed forces that carried out the operation. It is also worth remembering that Garcia Harfuch himself, or in interviews after the 2020 attack, was precise in stating that while the CJNG as an organization was responsible, there was no evidence that Mencho had personally and directly ordered the assassination attempt. That distinction matters. It was the cartel acting as a structure that tried to kill him, and it was that same structure, now without its founding leader, that the Mexican state struck on February 22, 2026. In a country where impunity is the overwhelming norm and where organized crime often seems structurally untouchable, that narrative thread matters in ways that go beyond symbolism. Not as a definitive victory, not as the end of the CJNG, not as the solution to Mexico's drug trafficking problem, an illusion the country has pursued without real success for decades, but as concrete evidence that the Mexican state, when it acts with real determination, with systematically applied intelligence, and with effective coordination between national and international institutions, can reach even the targets that for years seemed completely unreachable. The question that remains open is not whether Mexico achieved something important on February 22, 2026. It did, and the magnitude of that achievement is real. The question is, what comes next? Who will dispute control of the CJNG in the coming months? How will the organization respond to the loss of its founder? Was the violence that erupted in 8 states in the hours afterward just the beginning of a new cycle of bloodshed, or the last convulsion of a structure now facing its moment of greatest vulnerability? Mexico has lived this cycle before. It lived it after El Chapo, or it lived it after every major capo who fell in the last 20 years. And each time, the country holds its breath, waiting to see whether this time will be different. For now, only one thing can be stated with absolute certainty. The man they tried to kill in 2020 survived, rose, and was institutionally present the day Mexican armed forces ended the life of the leader of the organization that tried to kill it. And that leader did not survive to see it.